Welcome, everyone. This is Rhonda Dickens. She's an outpatient psychotherapist. And so today, what I'd like to talk about is we all have bias, subconscious or conscious bias. So what are questions we can ask ourselves to challenge ourselves in our biases?
One of my favorite questions that you're going to get sick of hearing, but it is, what is the root? What is the root of this bias? Because, people say bias, but what they're actually saying is there's an ignorance that we have. Does that mean that we're ignorant? No, ignorance is just lack of knowledge, right? And so bias is a lack of knowledge. And I'm going to pause the question because I am a parable girl, so I kind of speak or think in stories. I remember when I just got to college, and one of my cousins was going off to the military. And so he and I would always have conversation about what we were seeing on our side of the world. I was a history major, and so I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm learning all of these things. Well, he was actually seeing the world. So he's like, oh my gosh, I'm learning all of these things. But in every conversation that we would have, no matter what, and I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I think that I've cracked every historical code. But every time I would do that, he would say, Rhonda, you have to keep in mind that the more you know, the more you don't know. Yeah. It's really important for you to know that the more you know, the more you don't know. Wow. And that comes into subconscious bias. That comes into conscious bias. The more you know, the more you don't know. And so what you want to do is you want to ask yourself, what is the root of this? So if we made it situational and we looked at, I'm going to say my age here, but we took it back to the 80s when it was the war on drugs, and you could barely turn on your TV without seeing an African-American impoverished community that was going through this huge gang violence and was going through this huge drug epidemic. And so if you were to base it off of what you saw, then what you would know is that African Americans in impoverished communities are all addicted to drugs, are all fighting each other, are all shooting each other with guns. And so that's what you would know based upon the information that you've been given. But what if you were given more information, right? What if you were given information to know that that particular community was below the poverty line? So then you begin to have questions like, well, how did this particular community end up with military artillery and drugs that have been flown in from other countries? How did they have access to that? And so you end up getting into the more that you know about something, the more that you don't know about something. And then you continue to go and you see conspiracies and you see that there are underlying factors that's affecting everything that we see. But if we only look at the surface and not the roots and not the underlying factors, then we're always going to make judgment based upon what we don't know, right? And we have to understand that even with that, that's fear-based, right? I don't want to know anymore because this is what I know and this is what I'm comfortable with and this is the belief that I've had all of my life. And so in order to address bias, we have to address, number one, the ignorance behind it, meaning the lack of knowledge behind it. And number two, what is the root of the issues?
So we have some information, but not enough to give us a clear picture, so we develop a bias?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That's powerful. And that's why we're all prone to have biases, because we gain a little bit of information, but we don't take the time to really, truly understand.
We don't take the time to really, truly understand, and we don't take the time to kind of guard ourselves. I think that in this season, we really have to be careful of guarding our ear gates, our eye gates, what we're putting into our spirits, what we're looking at, what we're hearing on a regular basis, because sometimes those things can be steering you one way or another, and it goes back to that reactionary communication. This has triggered an emotion in me, and so therefore I'm going to react. My bias has triggered an emotion in me, and I am going to react to that emotion without even knowing why it's triggering that emotion.
Wow, the power of becoming self-aware is absolutely huge. One thing I say is that the more self-aware we are, the better decisions we make.
Yes, definitely.
So let us help ourselves by gaining information to become more self-aware. Thank you, Rhonda.
You're welcome.